I'm David Haynes. Welcome to the Journal Sentinel's On Politics show. I'm joined today by Craig Gilbert in Washington, Mary Spicuzza in Milwaukee, right here at this table, in fact, Dan Bison, Bill Glauber, also in Milwaukee, and Patrick Marley in Madison. Let's look at the headlines. First of all, the big news today, a meeting between Donald Trump and Paul Ryan. Can those two ever reconcile? We'll talk about that. Where does the turmoil in the GOP leave Ron Johnson in his Senate race against Russ Feingold? What can we expect from the state GOP convention in Green Bay this weekend? And what's behind the firing of the director of State Fair Park? We'll have winners and losers, and we'll take your questions. But first, the big news today, that meeting between Donald Trump and Paul Ryan. Here's what Paul Ryan had to say after the meeting.
I think we had a very encouraging meeting. Look, it's no secret that Donald Trump and I have had our differences. We talked about those differences today. That's common knowledge. The question is, what is that we need to do to unify the Republican Party and all strains of conservative wings in the party? We had a very good and encouraging, productive conversation on just how to do that. It was important that we discussed our differences that we have, but it was also important that we discussed the core principles that tie us all together. Principles like the Constitution, the separation of powers, the fact that we have an executive that is going way beyond the boundaries of the Constitution, and how it's important to us that we restore Article 1 of the Constitution. You know, it's the principle of self-government. We talked about life and how strongly we feel about this core principle. We talked about the Supreme Court and things like this. I was very encouraged with what I heard from Donald Trump today. I do believe that we are now planting the seeds to get ourselves unified, to bridge the gaps and differences. And so from here, we're going to go deeper into the policy areas to see where that common ground is and how we can make sure that we are operating off these same core principles. And again, I'm very encouraged. I heard a lot of good things from our presumptive nominee, and we exchanged differences of opinion on a number of things that, you know, everybody knows we have. There are policy disputes that we will have. There's no two ways about it. Plenty of Republicans disagree with one another on policy disputes, but on core principles. Those are the kinds of things that we discussed. And again, I'm encouraged.
All right, we're going to go to Craig Gilbert now in Washington. Craig, in that video clip, Paul Ryan said, "I'm very encouraged." He called Donald Trump a warm and genuine person, and he said he thought they could bridge the gaps between the two. But here's two words I didn't hear him say: I endorse.
No, we didn't get that. In fact, I asked the speaker if he expects to endorse Donald Trump, and he declined to answer that question. I also asked him if he got any assurances from Donald Trump that there'd be a change in the tone and tenor of his campaign, and he said he wanted to keep those conversations between the two of them private for now. We didn't get an endorsement, but we got, kind of every possible indication that that's where they are headed. I mean, there were no kind of cracks in the coalition that we saw. There were no ominous words. I mean, he talked and sounded like somebody who not only wanted to, but expected to get behind the nominee, which is, of course, what you would expect from the Speaker of the House.
Mary, let me go to you. You interviewed Donald Trump. No, you did not interview Donald Trump. You interviewed Paul Ryan earlier in the week. How did what you heard here today compare with what you were hearing from Paul Ryan earlier in the week?
Earlier in the week, I think he was clearly pretty hesitant. He said that he had some real questions about Donald Trump. He talked about wanting to unify, but also wanting to stick close to his conservative principles, and said that he and other conservatives have a lot of questions about Donald Trump. So I think he was, really pretty hesitant and set the expectations for this week pretty low. Maybe he was trying to make it clear that he didn't expect to walk out of the meeting with an endorsement and wanted to kind of temper expectations a bit. But he certainly did not have, glowing praise for Donald Trump earlier this week.
And Craig, on that point, is Ryan simply papering over differences here? I mean, on immigration, on taxes, on some social issues, on any number of issues, they have disagreements. How can you say they agree in the big things? They don't appear to agree in the big things.
No, there are some big things that they disagree on. He's talked about bridging the policy divides about the party. There's lots of Republicans that disagree. I mean, there's certainly Republicans in the conference who take the same position Donald Trump does on immigration. I think the tougher divide for him to paper over is the one that I alluded to earlier, which is tone and tenor and language. And Paul Ryan has always kind of stood for a Republican Party that's, while very conservative, is sort of reaching out to non-traditional Republican voters. And he's a collegial guy. He's given speeches on civility. So the hard part for him, I think, the hardest part for him to stomach about Donald Trump is the tone and tenor and language of his campaign. And I think it's going to be hard for him. Harder than even the policy differences.
Yeah. Have we heard anything from Trump yet?
They put out a joint statement, which basically said what Paul Ryan said, which is that we look forward to working together, and we're off to a good start, and we want to unite and defeat the Democrats in the fall.
All right. Now, Mary, Trump has said, though, just this week, something to the effect that unity's overrated. And I'll ask you both this question. Can Trump possibly win in November with a party that is not unified?
I think it would be a pretty hard sell for him. I think that in his mind, he's won all these voters. He has non-traditional voters behind him. People who don't typically turn out at the polls might come out to support him. But I do think that without the support of people like Paul Ryan, it's going to be harder for him to sell himself among a lot of the establishment conservatives, especially here in places like Wisconsin.
Yeah. And Trump, again, has not done as well in Wisconsin, according to the polling.
No. Or according to the primary.
Or according to the primary. Yeah. So, Craig, are we seeing a fundamental realignment of the Republican Party?
Well, this election will help answer that question because, the traditional choice has been between an establishment Republican and a kind of insurgent but very conservative, hardcore Republican like Ted Cruz, but they're not getting either one of those. They're getting a different kind of nominee. And so if Donald Trump goes on, for example, to lose the election, I don't think it'll advance the debate within the Republican Party about what the Republican Party needs to do to win presidential elections, because the moderates and the conservatives will still be fighting that fight. But we're certainly learning things about the base of the party that we didn't necessarily appreciate before, and that's the degree to which the Republican Party's economic agenda, the elites in the Republican Party, doesn't necessarily resonate with all the members of their working class base.
And so a question for both of you. We'll talk a bit more about this a little later in the show, but do House and Senate, those in the House and Senate running this year, need Donald Trump as much as Donald Trump needs them? Craig, let me go to you first.
Well, I think they don't really know what to do with Donald Trump. Donald Trump could be a drag on them. He could be bringing in new voters. That's why it's such a difficult choice for them. Sorry for all the noise in the background, but that's what makes it hard. Is because he could be bringing in new voters that they couldn't otherwise have counted on, but he could also be driving some of their traditional voters away. It's a very difficult calculus. What we do know is that if Donald Trump loses at the top of the ticket in a lot of these states like Wisconsin, it's just going to be that much harder for Senate candidates like Ron Johnson to compensate for that in their own races.
Right. And Mary? I'll give you the last word.
Certainly we heard a lot of concerns leading up to the primary of Assembly Republicans, Senate Republicans saying Donald Trump at the top of the ticket is going to hurt us all the way down to the state level. And there was real concern that he would alienate some of the more moderate voters, female voters, immigrants, or people who advocate for immigration reform. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see. I think he will bring out new voters who don't typically vote, but I think he could also turn some people off with his rhetoric.
Some of the leaders in the legislature saying they're on the Trump train. So
right,
I guess we'll have to see.
Some more enthusiastically than others.
Yeah. All right. Thanks to you both. Now we're going to move to a segment with Patrick Marley of our Madison Bureau and a preview of this weekend's GOP convention in Green Bay. I'm joined now by Patrick Marley. Patrick is in our Madison Bureau. Patrick, welcome.
Thanks, Dave.
And you're going to be going up to Green Bay this weekend on Saturday for the Republican State Convention. So what happens at a state convention?
Well, state convention is just an opportunity for all the candidates to sort of put forward their platform, put forward the platform of the party, rally together. If there are any primaries, they have opportunities to try to woo votes there. This will be an interesting year with Donald Trump at the top of the ticket and the party split to see where people are falling in elected office as well as just rank and file voters.
Right. So My sense is that the state parties for the GOP are actually in pretty good shape relative to the national party. There's this big split going on between Paul Ryan and Donald Trump right now, and between conservatives and Trump. But at the state level, isn't the party doing quite well?
Well, the state party in Wisconsin has always been a pretty strong entity, and I think that's been particularly true the last few years as it's been through recalls. And, everything has been such a high-profile fight in Wisconsin for the last 5 or 6 years. They've been operating at pretty peak performance and having good success. So I think the party itself at the state level is very healthy. Obviously, in the fall elections, politics gets nationalized, and Wisconsin is a place where off-year elections, Republicans have done well. Presidential years have gone the way of Democrats for, the last, since the 1980s.
Right. So what are you going to be watching for as you cover it on Saturday?
I think the main thing is going to be seeing how various people are reacting to Trump, what they're thinking. We've really seen this, Paul Ryan's been very circumspect about him. But people like Jim Sensenbrenner and Ron Johnson have said they're supporting Trump. Scott Fitzgerald, the state Senate Majority Leader, has said that we're on the Trump train. So it'll be interesting to see sort of where different people fall and how concerned they are, if at all, about the down ballot effect that Trump could have at the top of the ticket.
Do you think you'll see this manifestation of the split in the party at the state level on Saturday? Do you think you'll see signs of that?
Oh, I do. I think, or if nothing else, you can gauge the level of support. Are people going to be talking about Trump from the stage? Are people going to be wearing the Make America Great hats? Or are they distancing themselves from that? So, the party is truly split on this issue, and I think it'll give us a chance to sort of see where different folks are at on it.
So give me a few of the highlights. Who's speaking? Who should we be watching for on Saturday?
Yeah, Governor Walker will be speaking, and obviously he's always someone you want to hear from, but he's not on the ballot this year. And Ron Johnson, I think, is really what they'll be focused on. The senators get a huge challenge. Folks will be very interested in getting as much enthusiasm for his campaign. Obviously, a concern for Republicans is that they could see some drop-off in their core voters. They want to make sure those people who might not be excited about the presidential race at the moment, that they're motivated enough to come out to vote in the Senate race so they can keep that seat.
So in a big election year like this, where you have a senatorial race, you have a lot of state races, how important is the convention to getting people started in the right direction toward the election?
Oh, these conventions are a lot more interesting. There's a lot more enthusiasm in years like this versus in off-year elections where it's just sort of the most, sort of the core of the party. This is a little bit of a broader group. It's still, these are your grassroots activists. These are people who are engaged in the party at the county or district level. And it's an opportunity for them to get enthused and get them volunteering and getting them reaching out to their friends to do all the things you need to do to run successful campaigns.
Patrick Marley in our Madison Bureau, thanks so much for being with us.
Yeah, thanks, Dave.
So we're back with Dan Bice, columnist for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, and Bill Glauber, who's covering the U.S. Senate campaign. So, Bill, let me turn to you first. How does the turmoil at the top of the ticket affect this race?
Well, I think it does, and both sides know that. I talked to a leading Republican this week who told me that basically Trump would have to be within about 100,000 votes in order for Johnson to have a chance to win this race if they can split tickets. As you know, it's a tough year for Republicans anytime there's a presidential campaign in Wisconsin, so it's tough to get those voters to switch.
And to be within 100,000 votes for Trump right now appears to be pretty unrealistic, wouldn't you say?
Right now it does, but there's 6 months to go, and this is going to be a state, let's face it, Trump is going to try to play here all through the upper Midwest, so we don't really know what's going to happen.
But it will be interesting to see how he and Scott Walker get along, given his beating up Walker during the primary. It'll be a dance very similar to his one with Paul Ryan, I'm guessing.
Right. Yeah, and I think, these are Republicans, and they generally will get in line. That's at least the thinking, but it's going to take some time.
But this is weird.
Yes, it is. We can agree on that.
So what's been going on in the advertising process?
Actually, none of this stuff about Donald Trump has been discussed by the campaigns. Both campaigns are focused very much on what I've been calling the Toma blame game, and that is the opioid scandal at the Toma VA, where a number of veterans were given too many prescription drugs, and there are investigations related to the deaths of at least 3 of those veterans. Both campaigns are trying to say that the other candidate was responsible, knew something about this, and should have started an investigation or done something to try to stop it. It all started with a super PAC that is supporting Ron Johnson and is funded by the Koch brothers. They lock on to this 2009 memo from a union official to Russ Feingold. It says hand-delivered to him, outlining some of these problems. Now, Russ says he never got the memo, and the union official says it actually wasn't ever delivered. And so that's where things started this week. Russ Feingold then responded by saying, actually, Ron Johnson didn't take these things very seriously, should have dealt with it last year. And everything turned when 3 TV stations saw the Super PAC ad for Ron Johnson, said that they didn't consider it truthful, and they pulled it from their markets. And then PolitiFact looked at that ad and said that rated it, I believe, as a mostly false rating for the ad. So that's where things stood until today.
And then part 2 is the Feingold campaign comes back with an ad saying pulled, referencing the ad that was pulled from the air, and then attacking Johnson for what he did or did not do in terms of TOMA. That's what happens when you have 2 senators in one race. You can latch onto it, but onto an issue, and then of course, we have seen nothing yet. We have another Senate race where this is going to play big, and that is in the next Senate race involving Tammy Baldwin. So TOMA is going to be an issue for many years here.
Well, sometimes it's hard to tell which issues are actually polling well, but I think we got very good signals that voters care about this. Maybe not Milwaukee, but outstate they do, because the Koch-funded group spent $2 million on an ad, on this first ad. It went in Green Bay, Madison, Wausau, did not come to Milwaukee. And the Feingold campaign has been very upset about it, trying to respond very aggressively to it. I think it's clear that it's had an impact on the race.
So we're still a few months out from the race. A lot of people still
a few months. We're 6 months out from the race.
A lot of people still aren't paying attention, though. What's the impact of advertising at this point? What are they trying to do strategically?
I think they're trying to soften the other guy up.
Or drive up his negatives, which is the same thing. They're trying to, right now, the most recent polls showed that Feingold was up 10 points and that he didn't have the negatives that Ron Johnson did, which would make sense. He hasn't been in office for 5 or 6 years. What they're trying to do is they're trying to make sure that the negatives are level on both sides.
I wrote a story at the outset of this race in which I basically predicted the one certainty is both guys will be underwater in terms of their positives versus their negatives. And that's the track that the race is on.
And Bill, you mentioned earlier the difference between a presidential year and a non-presidential year. What is that difference?
Well,
what makes it harder?
The difference is
it
makes it harder for Ron Johnson because it is a far larger turnout than in a non-presidential year,
particularly in Milwaukee.
Among Democrats.
Among Democrats, and it's Democrats and African Americans, Latinos, older voters fueling that larger turnout, and presumably that would help Democrats. And Democrats have won this state in presidential years every year since 1984 when Reagan won. So it is an uphill battle for Ron Johnson.
It is very much Russ Feingold's race to lose. There would have to be major mistakes on his side for Ron Johnson to catch up and to beat him, I think.
What about if something flips at the top of the ticket? Say Hillary Clinton has more problems than we expect with whatever.
Well, sure. I mean, there have been close races in Wisconsin, 2000, 2004. I mean, if you have a race like 2000 or 2004 here, anything is possible in which the presidential race is decided by 10,000 votes or fewer. This will definitely be competitive.
But as we've mentioned before, Ron Johnson is not just has bad negatives. He's also not very well known in the state. He just didn't do a very good job over the last 5 years of getting out, talking to the media, talking to voters. He tended to go to places where he was well known already or where he was viewed favorably. And, he's paying the price right now.
Well, let's shift gears. Bill, you wrote a story this morning about the firing of Rick Frenette, the director of State Fair Park. What's going on there? Apparently, State Senator Leah Vukmir was the board member who made the motion to fire him. What's the backstory there?
If I knew what was going on, I would have been in the 4-hour closed-door meeting, but I wasn't. This was in closed session.
Very little that was in open
Very
session.
little was in open session, so Rick Furnett, the executive director, got fired. Kathleen O'Leary, who is the chief operating officer, she's moved in an interim position. And when you come to a meeting with Attorney Frank Gimbel in tow, you know you're in trouble. And so Furnett was fired, and according to Gimbel, it was because of these that he had issued merit pay raises, and according to Gimbel, I have to read this, the allegation was that it was in contravention of the rules and regulations of the Department of Administration. So it's still a bit of a mystery as to what went on behind closed doors. It'll unravel over the next couple of weeks.
I think one thing that we haven't seen so far that you can guess, that is that the governor is somehow involved, because the governor has a very close relationship with the state fair. Not just this governor, but all governors do. They usually put someone in charge who's selected by the governor. And my guess is, it's his technique that if there is a problem with a particular administrator, he deals with it pretty quickly. And I'm guessing the reason that Liam Vukmir would be making this motion is to show that the Republicans are in charge. They realized there was a problem and they wanted to deal with it.
And this was, the DOA, there were two Department of Administration attorneys and who were there present at this meeting. And, the DOA is under Governor Walker. So, and also we don't know how big these merit pay increases were and how they might play, given the fact that most state workers have received, 1% increases, salary increases. So, it'll funnel out in the next few days and weeks.
Yeah. Right. This is an attempt to get ahead of whatever scandal or problem there is. You deal with it, and it makes the story seem old by the time we find out what actually happened there.
All right. Well, let's move on to winners and losers. Who wants to go first?
Well, to me, the obvious winner this week is Donald Trump. He's the king of the Republican Party. The entire establishment is going to bow before him, is what it looks like. So, Donald Trump.
And my winner this week was Russ Feingold. On the Toma blame game, he got the Johnson ad moved off of 3 TV stations, and he got a PolitiFact criticizing that ad. So I think it went about as well as he could want.
Okay. What about Bill? Your loser.
Well, unfortunately, Rick Furnett, he went on that big ride down the slide and out of State Fair Park. But it was stunning how.
Have you ever gone down the slide?
I have never gone down the slide.
I've gone down on one.
But it was stunning how quickly this was engineered.
And my loser this week is Sarah Palin. While Donald Trump, she's a surrogate for Donald Trump, and while he's talking unity and that everybody should be getting together and criticizing Paul Ryan for not getting on board, she's saying she's going to help knock Paul Ryan out of office. A little bit of disconnect there between the messages.
Are we sure that's what she's saying, though? It is Sarah
We were both
Palin.
there when she spoke at the Friday night fish fry here in Wisconsin, and I still don't know what she said then. So,
Sarah Palin has not done real well in Wisconsin lately. Let's take a few questions from our viewers. Here's one. How long will Ryan and Trump do this dance? A few more weeks? A few more days? Dan, what do you think?
I think it's still going to take a while because I think, in addition to what conversations are going on, there's a political calculus that's going on in Ryan's head, which is, if this thing blows up, do I want to be anywhere near it? I think what he's trying to figure out is, will Donald Trump be able to tame things, to bring it down a notch during the election or not? But it's going to go I think it's going to go for at least another couple or 4 weeks.
Ryan, my understanding is Ryan and House Republicans want to roll out their election year agenda. So I think, and they wanted to do that, I think, within the next month. So that might be what we're looking at. And he's intent on doing this.
But he said a couple things today that I thought were interesting. One, he points out that Trump got more votes than any other Republican running in the primary, running for president ever. And he was very open, saying these are people we haven't reached before. We should try to make sure we reach out to them. He also talked of himself not as the standard bearer for the entire party. He said, I'm the leader of a wing of the party. So he's trying to place himself at a little bit of distance, saying Trump is on that wing of the party, I'm in this wing, and we're trying to bring them together.
What else is interesting about this is that Mitt Romney, who picked Paul Ryan as his running mate in 2012. Mitt Romney came out and really in a screed against Trump for not releasing his tax records. What's in there? That's another story to follow.
Well, Romney's been talked about as a potential third-party candidate by Bill Kristol.
But he's not going to do it.
Yeah, he says he's not
going to do it.
The hard thing is you have a candidate who's not very well known for his policy positions, but is known for his personality in Trump. On the other side, you have a guy who's not known so much for his personality, but is known for his policy positions. You have a policy wonk and a big personality trying to come together and make it fit.
Well, they'll try to thread the needle with that, and if they can do that, then they might be able to go forward.
At a certain point,
November,
Ryan's got to do something here, though, right? I mean, if more Republicans start to join the Trump train, and there's some signs in the polling, at least, that might happen.
The funny thing is, he seemed incredibly comfortable in his talk with the Journal Sentinel earlier this week on TV. It's sort of like, whether this thing works out or not, I'm okay. I'm going to emerge and be just fine. I've just been surprised at how calm he's been throughout the whole process.
All right, one more question. This from the Democratic side. One of our listeners wants to know, so will Hillary Clinton adopt Bernie Sanders' Democratic Socialist agenda to unite the Democratic Party, Bill?
She won't adopt a democratic socialist agenda, but she's going to.
That's the way to win.
Yeah, but she's clearly moved left during the campaign.
There's no doubt about that.
And I think that's probably where they're headed. I guess the big question is, would she pick Elizabeth Warren as her running mate? That's a big question.
Actually, she doesn't move. I don't think she moves any further to the left because she's as far as she needs to go. She's got the delegates. Now she's got to move to the center, but on to that left by her vice presidential pick.
But can you imagine, she has another month-long slog of this. She's won the nomination, basically. Sanders has stayed in the race, and it's a month-long slog that is going to be tough on her, I think.
So let me follow up with a question.
Are you allowed to do that?
I am. I'm going to make the rule here. What does Bernie Sanders want?
I don't even know if Bernie Sanders knows what he wants. I mean, he would like to be president, but he's not going to be. He would like to be the nominee, but he's not going to be. Usually the challenger has to get up on the stage and give a rah-rah speech for Hillary Clinton.
Gosh, if I were Bernie Sanders, I'd want to take a nap at this point. I mean, it is exhausting. This campaign is utterly exhausting. I mean, his voice was shot here a month ago, and now when you hear it on the campaign trail, it's doubly shot.
I think he's in better shape than the three of us.
I think so.
I think he is. I don't think I could do it. Well, we'll have to leave it there. I'm Dave Haynes for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. My thanks to Craig Gilbert, Mary Spacuzza, Patrick Marley, Dan Bice, and Bill Glauber. We'll see you next week.